Hi, this is Brock Dickinson, and today I'm coming to you from the Niagara region of Canada, one of the primary tourist regions in Canada. And I wanted to talk today a little bit about the impact of tariffs on the tourism sector itself. And this is something we're just starting to get a first series of insights into as new data gets released. So, the United States Customs and Border Patrol, or CBP, monitors the flow of traffic across the borders, including tourism traffic as it enters and leaves the United States. And they've just released the data for February of 2025. So, in February, the tariffs were not yet in place, although there were lots of sort of tariff threats being levied. It was really March 1st that those hit, and some have been delayed now till April 1st. But tariffs were already top of mind for many folks in that February timeframe, and it was already beginning to have an impact on tourism plans and travel intentions. And what the data shows, for example, is that border crossings, return border crossings, the kind that tourists make between the United States and Canada, were down by about 20% over the same time period a year ago. So they dropped from February, in terms of February crossings, from 2.7 million people a month, Canadians traveling to the US and back, to 2.2 million Canadians traveling there and back. So about a 20% decrease. That suggests a number of really interesting things. If the decrease was 20% before the tariff conflict started, it's likely higher than that now and will continue probably to increase as people sort of change their plans moving forward. And that has real implications for the US economy. Right now, Canadians represent the number one tourist market for the United States. About 21 million Canadians a year travel to the United States. They spend on average about 980 US dollars per person, meaning that there's an impact of about $21 billion to the positive side for the US economy. There are many American businesses that depend on this Canadian tourism traffic. And in fact, it's directly responsible for about 140,000 jobs in the tourism sector. So, right off the bat, a 20% reduction in crossings, as we saw in February, represents about a $425 million hit to the American economy and puts about 28,000 tourist jobs at risk immediately. And that's just in the context of what's going on with Canadians coming to the States. Because when we look at who the number two source of tourists is for the United States, it's Mexico. And of course, the story there isn't too much difference. The number of Mexicans traveling to the US is a little bit smaller than the number of Canadians, but together, Canadians and Mexicans make up about 45% of all tourist traffic to the United States. So, sustaining close to 70,000 jobs and billions in revenues to American businesses. So, if you're in the US tourism sector, this is raising some real questions in your mind. How hard will I be impacted? How much will my business suffer? And what are my alternatives? Well, we can do a few things by looking more deeply into the data. So, if we think about Canadians, for example, and where they travel to, the bulk of that tourism activity is concentrated in 5 states. That's California, Nevada, Texas, Florida, and New York. So if you're outside those five, there's a good chance that the impact may be a little bit less than if you're in those five. But those five are really going to feel the brunt of the declining number of Canadians. And there's some who might say, well, if the Canadians aren't coming, the Mexicans aren't coming, we'll just go further down the list and kind of see who else can come. Number 3 on the list is the United Kingdom. Number 4 is Germany. And of course, the tariff discussions have been recently extended to sort of look specifically at the UK and Europe as the next range of targets. But there's also a challenge in that the number of tourists coming from the UK or from Germany is a much smaller number than those coming from Canada or Mexico. So the ability for these third, fourth, fifth, sixth place countries to kind of pick up the slack on some of this tourism traffic is pretty limited. And this suggests that a lot of American tourism businesses are going to be in for a rough ride over the next couple of years. So what can you do? Well, I think that one thing you might want to try is if that you've had a lot of Canadian customers or Mexican customers in the past, you may wish to reach out to them and try to suggest that your business is different, that your interests are different, and that you're welcoming them back. That personal touch may score some points with those potential travelers, and suggesting that you're not in support of the tariff regimes that have been proposed might be one way of attracting a little bit of that traffic back. North of the border, or south of the border in Mexico, this raises a whole series of other issues. And they're more positive in terms of their potential implications. Because if 20 or 30 or 40% fewer Canadians are traveling to the United States as tourists, it suggests a pent-up tourism demand that is looking for somewhere to spend that money that would have typically or traditionally spent within the United States. And so that means, for example, that many Canadians, many Mexicans will be looking to find alternative destinations to the United States, or, as we saw during the pandemic period, looking for opportunities to vacation closer to home. You may remember this phrase of staycations that we coined during the pandemic. This notion that if I couldn't travel globally or internationally, at least I could travel closer to home, and that had the double effect of allowing me to continue to be a tourist while supporting local or domestic businesses within my own economy. This is a strategy that Canada in particular really focused on during the pandemic. And one thing that Canadian communities could be doing at the moment is to dust off all of those pandemic era staycation, travel close to home kinds of marketing strategies to roll them back out. If 10 or 20 or 30% of those Canadian tourists aren't traveling to the United States, maybe they'll come to your Canadian community. Maybe they'll look at your destination as an alternative. And how are they going to know about that? Well, you need to be marketing to them. The good news is for Canadian communities, they already have those marketing plans in place. They used them 5 years ago at the height of the pandemic, and they may be able to recycle some of those initiatives in the current context. The other thing that Canadian tourism businesses and communities can be doing is to really think about addressing that new market. If that was a market that traditionally went to the US, maybe you need to educate them about the opportunities within your particular community or your region. And so thinking about advertising campaigns that specifically speak to those domestic tourists. We've seen recently, for example, the province of Nova Scotia announce a summer marketing campaign targeting Canadians that might otherwise be traveling to the United States. We see tourism businesses in the province of Ontario lobbying the government for the return of a staycation tax credit that was available to Ontario residents during the pandemic if they vacationed at Ontario destinations. And so we'll probably start to see many of these historic or traditional strategies from that pandemic period reinvigorated and revisited as we sort of think about moving forward. We're also likely to see increased competition for those international tourists. And the notion is not just that Mexicans and Canadians may be reluctant to go to the United States, but the tourists from many other jurisdictions have also been spooked by all of this tariff discussion and by threats of annexation of places like Greenland or Panama. And so they may also be looking for alternative destinations. They will be less familiar with Canada or with Mexico, but that doesn't mean that they're not prepared to consider traveling to those places. And so there's an opportunity to kind of ramp up the tourism marketing to target those European and Asian travelers in particular, to sort of say, hey, you might have been thinking about the US, you might have been thinking about New York or Los Angeles or Miami or something like that. Let us present to you a series of alternatives. If that happens, that's going to represent a pretty significant windfall for the Canadian and Mexican tourism market. And so we might actually see increased inflows of revenue to that sector, higher profits, more hiring, increased wages. And so this may be one of those silver linings for Canada and Mexico in the context of the tariff struggles, in the same way that it represents a danger sign or a problem area for the United States as the discussion around tariffs and President Trump's plans for the next economy continue to unfold.